Hello and welcome to Hadfield Education's Good to Great Education webinar series, where I interview the UK leading head teachers and education consultants. And today I'm speaking with Jeni Ling, who is an education consultant based in the Northeast. Hi Jenny, how are you?
Hi Lee, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Very good. Thank you for joining me today. So Jenny, tell me, what took you into teaching in the first place?
Well, it wasn't the traditional route. I didn't get into teaching until my late 20s. I was like 29, 11, 12, I think, before I went into teaching. I had a variety of roles after leaving university, and I worked for a charity called Help the Aged, and I went round the country giving assemblies and talks about old people, and then ran sponsored events. I did that for about 3 or 4 years, but then I realised actually I really wanted to be in schools. So I went and did a postgrad teaching certificate and got into teaching after that. So I was, 30 by the time I got into it.
Fantastic. And in terms of having a career before going into teaching, do you think that benefited you?
Yes, because I knew it was what I didn't want. And I think I chose to go into teaching from having the experience of being in schools rather than thinking about the role of a teacher. So yes, I think it did benefit me. I think it can be very limiting if you go straight from school into university into teaching, because you never actually leave that environment. So yes, I do. I think it was useful. I didn't think so at the time, but hindsight's a great thing.
Sure. And in terms of your career path, what did you how did that transpire?
You're frozen.
Oh, sorry. How did that transpire? Oh, technical glitch.
Right, I think you're back.
Yes, I am back. Sorry, I'll ask again. How did your career transpire? So you started obviously as an NQT, or well, probably there weren't even the term NQT.
Way before then. Well, it was a very shaky start because at the time there were more applicants than there were places, and it was a closed community really. And you could only apply for permanent jobs if you were already working for the authority. So they were all in-house. So I couldn't actually get in. So I did a number of short-term contracts in various different schools. And then in my CV, I used that as an advantage because I'd experienced different schools, rather than actually I was an unstable person moving from school to school. So it took me probably 2 to 3 years to actually get a permanent position. And when I did get a permanent position, it was immediately a scale 2, which in those days you had your scale 1s and your scale 2. And as I was last in the door, it was girls' games. And of course, I knew very little about girls' games. I was pretty hopeless at it myself. But I tried to build team spirit. We weren't going to win anything, but we'd enjoy the competitiveness. And I think a lot of it was about competing for the enjoyment rather than for the winning. Valiant losers, I think we were. It was a shaky start because it took me a long time, and when you're applying for jobs and not getting them, you begin to doubt whether it's the right path for you.
Yeah, I often have that conversation with teachers who it's almost as if they expect to get the first job that they apply to, and I think even now it's so competitive, in particular in certain areas, that it really does take sort of well-crafted application, real thought, a little bit of luck as well to be able to land your next job. So
yeah.
And in terms of your then progression through school, what path did you take?
Well, I was at the school, that particular school, for 4 years, and then in those days, it was difficult to be ambitious. there was no career path as such. I was looked down on because you've only been here a few years. You know, why are you going for deputy headships? But I thought, well, you know, give it a try. So the first one I tried, I actually got, which I was quite surprised at. I was there for sort of 7 years as deputy in a small primary school, church school. But I got very restless there. I used to swim fanatically because I was frustrated because I felt I could do more, and I wasn't being held down because the head was very laid back and let me do more or less what I wanted, but I wanted to run a school. And it was a bit of a joke within the authority that I must have had the most interviews of anybody. And I lost track around 29. And this is over quite a short period of time. So obviously my application was a good one. But my feedback was, you talk too quickly. The governing body thought they'd been pinned against the wall. My passion was kind of a little overwhelming. And I had to dumb things down because the governing bodies were not recognising what I was trying to do. But when I finally got my headship, it was the right school. And it was an interesting challenge.
So tell me about taking the main seat in school. How was that?
It was the most exhilarating, terrifying, challenging thing I've ever done. The school had had appointed a new deputy in the Easter, and then the head left at very short notice halfway through the summer term. Ofsted was due 5 weeks into the new term, and I was appointed at the very, very end of the summer. I was allowed to be released from my deputy headship. We also had a major refurbishment happening at the same time. So when I went into the school and tried, the Ofsted inspector arrived for his pre-visit. This was before term started. I couldn't find a door that I could open because I've never met so many doors in schools, and I couldn't find the keys, and that place you couldn't go to because the floor was being varnished, and it was chaos. Wow. Absolute chaos, physically chaos. But it was also, I realised at the first staff meeting that the paperwork was very substandard. And I had to make the decision, would I change it all, or would I say, yes, I know these are the issues, and present it to Ofsted as it was. And I presented, rather than trying to change everything overnight, I presented it as it was to the inspector and explained my plans. And it worked. I mean, those were in the days before you got all sorts of advice about doing things, and I was very much on my own. And then there was a I hate the word roller coaster ride because everybody uses it nowadays, but it really was a hugely challenging school in a challenging pocket within an affluent area. I had no deputy. Well, I did have a deputy, but he went on capability within a year, and that took some doing. He was bullying staff. He was inept at his job. Okay. And here was me, a new head teacher coming in. So that in itself was a challenge because I couldn't bring others on board in terms of what I was doing with him. But anyway, then I didn't.
How did you overcome that first? Because it sounds like you say a huge task.
Yeah.
How did you overcome the real big chunks of issue, the real main challenges, and how long did that take you?
The main challenges were the deputy, the staff in some ways, because they'd been used to having quite an easy life,
yeah,
and being told what to do. And I think those were the two main challenges. I think that the parents, although were challenging in themselves, were less of an issue for me to win over. So I suppose tenacity and downright stubbornness, because I knew what had to happen and it was going to happen. I didn't lose many staff on the way because gradually most of them were able to come on board. I registered to do Investors in People quite early on, and they gave me a really good framework for enabling the staff to be more participative. And that really worked for me. And the guy who ran that was like a mentor. He mentored me a lot in terms of all the processes, because all the processes had to be redug. But it was a huge challenge, but I absolutely loved it. And that's what suits me is the big, it's problem solving. And I think that that's at the essence of what I do now as well, is, you know, give me a huge issue and I'll try and work my way around it or get strategies to overcome it.
And what advice would you give to head teachers currently, or even assistant deputy heads that are looking to move into headship?
I think it's about the power of your beliefs. And I think that I went in with very clear vision of what I wanted to achieve in the school, and getting the staff and the community on board with that vision was really, really important. And I think sticking with that vision then became, everything had to relate back to the vision. And if it related back to the vision, then it was okay. So I kind of set the path of integrity through the school, that everything related back to the vision. And I suppose my advice to anybody taking on that role is to be crystal clear from the outset what your vision is, and bring others on so it becomes their vision as well. There's no point going in and having a vision for a school and not actually having the whole school community behind that vision. And I think that's the starting point, because everything else sort of fits underneath it.
And in terms of your headship, how long were you a head teacher for?
8 years.
And then what happened to then move you on to the next path?
Well, it's an interesting story. I was so passionate about my school and my pupils and my parents and the whole community that I didn't really, I wasn't really aware of what was going on in the local authority and how I'd become a pain in the neck, really. So after a lengthy disagreement, we agreed to part our ways. I was pretty, I hadn't taken into account that every time I was banging on the door saying, why haven't I got an ed psych here, and why haven't I got this, and why haven't I got that, you know, I was going higher and higher up the hit list. So we parted ways. We were due to move up to the northeast anyway, so, you know, it was a good time to leave. I left without any clear vision about where I wanted my career to go, but I was very fortunate in getting a very late sort of temporary post with the local authority as an assessment advisory teacher. Having been asked what I knew about assessment for learning, I said very little, but I'm a fast learner. So, and this was before the assessment for learning came in with the strategies. Sure. So I then had to start developing the training materials and training people within assessment for learning. So that was when I moved from sort of mainstream education into adult learning. But I didn't really know very much about it then. So after that contract was 18 months, I think, and then I moved to another local authority and became a change management consultant. And then I started getting trained in change management toolkits and getting people really, really interactive training.
Yeah.
And that then, I think, yeah, that went part-time. I think that was part-time. I can't remember. Because I got another job then working for NCSL, the National College, NCTL as it is now, delivering New Visions, a program for early headship. And that was my tipping point. That was when I suddenly found my niche. You know, as a head, I was a little bit too thinking outside the box for a conservative authority. As an advisory teacher, I was still following all the rules, but kind of not necessarily comfortable with them. And then when I started looking at adult learning, I learned more about any sort of learning than I had ever experienced throughout my career. And we used to go to the college and we were trained for a whole day to deliver a whole day. This was in the days of massive funding.
Yeah.
It was really challenging because there were some of the best educational brains in the country running this, and it was just amazing and so exciting. And that's moved me into what I'm doing now.
So what was one of your biggest takeaways from, say, an event where you just had your own light bulb moment?
That's not on the list. I think my light bulb moment came when I realized that we all learn and act in different ways. So it was, I mean, my initial degree was psychology, so I've always been interested in what motivates people and how people do things. And then I did I know what my light bulb moment is. I did Kolb's learning style. It's my favorite thing. And I did it myself prior to delivering it to the cohort. And I found that in terms of active learning, I'm sort of against the back wall. Whereas other people may be near the sort of middle. I was way out on a limb with 2 other people. And then we started talking about how we learned and how we approached things, and we did it in a very similar way. And then we began to understand the sort of the pedagogy underpinning that. And for me, that was a huge light bulb, because if you have an unusual learning style, then you're always slightly out of the norm.
Sure.
But if you understand what it is, and then you look at other people on the other side, and there's my husband is on the other side, I can tell you for a start. But then you see, well, actually data and tables and processes and rules are fine, but that's not my preferred learning style. So I think that the light bulb moment was about me and about how I approach things and how I learned. And since then, I've used it with a group of Indian state officials who were non-educationalists, and they were primarily professors and very learned people. And I put them through this practical Kolb, put it out on the floor, and had them all in their quadrants. And I had some very snooty senior lecturers, actually senior professors, saying, well, I can understand why I'm down here, but I can't see why you are. So there was a lot of kind of bringing people on board to understand that everybody's learning style is right for them. And I use it in my programs now as well, because I think it really helps people understand why there are certain people that you would give data analysis to, and there are other people who you'd say, you know, we really need to brainstorm something around this. So I think that was my light bulb.
So tell me about the current initiatives and what you're working on at the moment.
Yes, I was thinking about this and thinking how to categorize it all. And I think that going back to what we were saying before, a lot of it's about problem solving. So I'm freelance, and I do whatever really excites me. I'm of the age now that I'm semi-retired, so I cherry pick really interesting things, which to me is just a gift. So I started in Cumbria working with some very challenging schools that were going through some really turbulent times. There was an issue with a principal who was bullying, and he was suspended, and everybody was scared of him coming back. And I worked with them a lot to get them able to accept this bloke back. And I worked with the governors. A lot of it was around change management and managing emotion and things. I'm working with I usually work with schools that have got an issue that they want solving. It could be a personnel issue, it could be a structures and processes issue. So usually I go in and help a school that's struggling. But at the moment I'm working in my first outstanding school, and I'm working to make them progress further than outstanding. And interestingly, the first thing I did was I'd only met the principal, and I was in there were 90 people in one room, and we were looking at developing vision. And I prepared all the slides, and I was telling them all about vision and how to do this and how to do that. And then the Saturday before, I suddenly thought, why am I doing it this way? This is not the way I do it. So I flipped the whole thing and sent him an email, said, don't worry about the slides, I've changed it all. Went in and then got them engaged, them working groups, them working on their phones, looking for examples of vision statements, what resonates with you, bringing them all together. And because it was a special school, 70% of them were not teachers, they were support staff. Yeah. And there were one or two who simply wouldn't engage, but most of them, 98% of them, were absolutely onto it. And I've just seen some documentation coming from the school, and they've got their vision statement there, and they've taken the pertinent words out, and they've just got 3 words along the bottom. So I stood there, look at these 90 people, thinking I must be bonkers, because it's quite a difficult group to manage, and they were all sort of spread out along the ways, which makes it harder. They weren't that way, they were that way. you know what I mean. What else do I do? I deliver...
In terms of the 3 words, what were the 3 words? I'm intrigued.
Inspire. Oh, I don't know. It was something about the pupils, the future, and the parents, bringing them all, innovate, inspire, and I don't know, can't remember.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
And in terms of, so your main role when you have those kind of challenges has predominantly been helping schools that are in a pickle and need structure, support and help. What do you think makes a good senior leadership team within a school? I think it's one that's open and not, it's open to being part of the whole school, not just a top heavy bit, so that the principal or head teacher and the senior leaders and the middle leaders and all the staff are all part of one. And although the senior leaders' role is more strategic than the middle leaders, nevertheless, I deliver MPQL, and it's really important that middle leaders are actually empowered within their own area in the school. So I would see a successful senior leadership team as being one that's, in the same way that I would see a successful principal, is one that enables and empowers people in their teams to fulfill their potential and to take part in the direction that the school's going. And questioning is huge. Asking the right questions, always. And if I was going back to my headship, I think one of the first things I'd do would be to have a workshop around questioning skills. Because I think that's where there's such a reservoir of knowledge within the school. If you don't ask the right questions of the right people, you don't even know it's there. Yeah, I do tend to find the schools that have, well, if you call it a better harmony, there is a lot more collaboration. There is a lot more sharing and helpfulness. And
conversations.
Yes.
Conversations is absolutely crucial. Yeah. Yeah. I
mean,
mean,
where do you foresee the education sector moving? Obviously, lots of schools have become, autonomous businesses. We have academization and less local authority. Where do you see it going?
It's a difficult one because I've seen so many changes over my career that in some ways it's almost like a spiral because you keep going back. And I think the autonomy that academies have is a double-edged sword. There are some amazing academies doing amazing work without local authority interference, which is great. But there are some that become fiefdoms a little, with some very powerful, very well-paid people, and they're run as a business. Sure. And although somebody going from being a teacher into a head teacher, I could have done with some aspect of business training, because you teach within a classroom, and then in my days you went straight into running a school. So there is certainly a place for running schools in that way, but it's not about profit, it's about people. So
do you think that's become forgotten, or do you think it's held in less high regard?
I don't think you can generalize, because I think that in some places, yes, it definitely has been forgotten. And I think in other places, the pupils and the students are at the center of everything. So I don't think you can really generalize it. But I think that sometimes these academies become very big and very hard-nosed and can go into schools and impose their academization on a school without actually going in and trying to build the school up from within. Which is, you could argue that actually going in and imposing from the top with a successful recipe is better. But I think from a school and from a people point of view, it's quite difficult for schools to take that on. Sure.
And where do you see the academy structure moving?
I honestly don't know. I think it's one of those things that it seems to be getting bigger and bigger, but then successful things that get bigger and bigger, you get a different government coming in, and they changed they don't just move the goalpost, they move the sports club. I mean, I worked at the National College for 8 years. It was a big commute from Newcastle to Nottingham. I used to go down every Sunday night, come back Thursday. But for me, something like the National, I mean, this is kind of diversing really, but it's something I feel quite passionate about, is there we were world leaders in developing educational leadership within schools. And okay, you know, there came a time when it needed to be rolled out more into the community. Nevertheless, to take away that amazing environment of innovation and educational thought, I think is scandalous. So something as successful as the National College, you change the government and they sort of push it to one side. So the same thing could well happen with academies, because unfortunately education is linked to politics and they're making decisions for political reasons, not necessarily for the good of the students.
Yeah.
I'm not very political, but it does get me, does kind of make me pretty angry.
well, like you say, and I remember when I first fell into education recruitment, and within my first 2 years, there was a reduction in the pay ladder from 9 to 6. Then all of a sudden, there were upper pay thresholds, and under a Labour government, it was very, very public sector driven and focused on how can we make this more attractive.
Yeah.
Which actually brings me on quite nicely too. I've got a bee in my bonnet at the moment in regards to teaching being a vocation. I genuinely feel that my teachers throughout my education had their own feeling for wanting to give back and saw teaching as their vocation. Mm-hmm. Do you still think that's the case where the student teachers and NQTs are concerned nowadays?
I think certainly in my day, in when I was in schools, more as part of the teams, the ones for whom it wasn't a vocation, you could tell, because they were the groaners and the moaners, and they were the out the door at 3:30, 4 o'clock. If it isn't a vocation, it is damned hard work. You know, it really is. And I think that if you don't do it for the good of the students, then the motivation has gone. And I think that it's such a hard job that if you haven't got that motivation and that love of what you're doing, then it's really hard.
Sure.
But I think one thing that I've also done ambition school leadership training for middle leaders. And these are specifically middle leaders in challenging schools and twilights. You know, they do about 3 or 4 a term. And these kids, I mean, in my children's age, these young teachers are incredible, because it's changed so much over the past 30 years from being possibly, I don't know in terms of respect, but in terms of the job, when I first started teaching, it was relatively easy. It was pre-national curriculum. So if it was sunny, you'd go out and play rounders.
Yeah.
It's become more and more by prescription, by files. You know, remember the 10 national curriculum files? It's become more and more process driven, but by the same thing, there's a lot of resources there. So you get, the interactive whiteboards and all the things that you can use as resources makes that part easier. But in terms of accountability and the hard-nosed, you've got to get X number through at level 4 in SATs or whatever, or there are consequences. And I think the accountability has made it really, really tough. And I think that certainly some of the areas in some of the schools in Newcastle who are dealing with some really, really tough social issues, those teachers need a medal, because they continue to look for ways of transforming these people's lives. And I come along and mention, oh, have you tried this? And oh, yeah, we've tried that, they really are trying everything. They're very creative. How they will be in another 20 or 30 years, I don't know. Teacher burnout is a well documented phenomenon, sadly,
yeah,
and understandably. But they're great. I love working with these teams of young teachers who want to learn. They're passionate about their own development and their own learning, which is something that was missing early in my career. And it's such an exciting thing to be involved in.
Definitely. I think teaching is probably one of the best jobs in the world. I do. The ability to influence and engage the next generation is certainly, if you don't get a buzz out of that, then there's something wrong with you. And I'm a dad, and just doing it with my own kids and, their friends is just brilliant. It's just brilliant.
If you can get a buzz out of it, but unfortunately you can get into the situation. I remember when I was a deputy, it was always after lunchtimes, it was all the discipline issues that always came my way that interfered with what I was trying to do. And I think that if you've got any kind of school where behaviour is an issue, and every school has it in some way or another, but that can be such a negative pull on your emotional capacity, because it is the most rewarding job. And you get these light bulb moments, and there are some in my career that I will never forget. But equally, you get some moments where you just could bang your head up against a brick wall, because no matter what you try, it's not working.
Sure. And what's next for you in terms of roles and jobs that you're doing at the moment?
Well, one of the things I've been involved in for a couple of years is inspections in Dubai. So I go to Dubai for sort of blocks of time, and we inspect the schools out there, the state schools for UAE. And I'm kind of expecting a call at the minute. So I may be off there, I may not be. It's always very last minute, so you kind of have everything ready to fling into a suitcase. So I'll be doing that as and when that comes up. But in the meantime, I'll be doing much of what I'm doing at the moment. Is that it's getting the reputation for being able to get into schools and manage these crises, or just going in and, I mean, one school I've bespoke to leadership programs, so I've got the head in the SLT for one session every half term for a year. So, it's bespoke to their needs. They're a special school. I'm also we're bespoking an MPQ for special needs. So we're doing a pilot which starts in about 3 weeks.
Excellent.
So it's the MPQSL and MPQML, but it's with an SEND focus. So it will be looking at the data and how you can show impact, and how leadership, how everything in the leadership programs is relevant to special schools. So I'm hoping that then picks up and takes off. Ready to start a second one in September.
Do you find that the special needs sector is underserviced in terms of the way in which, say, mainstream primary, mainstream secondary is?
What do you mean by underserviced?
Well, for example, normally for somebody going through a middle leader qualification,
right.
Is your product, your bespoke product, is that specific to the equivalent of what those are, but specifically aimed at special needs?
Yeah.
I'm just surprised that there wouldn't be more of that kind of qualification, because it's such a specific and specialist sector.
There are, don't get me wrong, there are specialist qualifications. There are organisations that run specific SEND qualifications, but what we're doing is enabling them to get a mainstream qualification, an MPQSL or an MPQML, but with the SEND focus. Yeah. So say they wanted to go back into mainstream, they would have that credibility.
Okay.
So it's the credibility, but I mean, the greatest thing, of course, is showing impact in data, because, in some of these in a lot of special schools, you can't use Fisher Family Trust, you can't use PISA, you can't use all these other data programs, because the assessment is so individualized.
Yeah.
So I think we're looking to build a really good resource to enable people to show impact of their leadership within the special sector. That's what we're aiming for and working on at the moment.
Excellent. And what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, my email address is jeniling89@gmail.com, which is JENILING 89.
I'll put the links. I'll put the links below.
Oh, okay. I just spell it because everybody else puts NY. And I'm on Twitter as well.
What's your hashtag?
Ling Jeni.
Brilliant. So I'll get those and I'll put those on to the end of the webinar as well.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
If anybody wants to contact me just to talk things through, that's fine. I do travel, you know, all over the world as well as over here. I like getting on planes.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. And thank you ever so much for your time. It's been incredibly informative. And like I say, I'll put the links and email in the notes and everything below.
Super. Okay. Well, thank you, Lee. Thanks for your time.
No problem. Thank you.